HS2 should have followed the M40. That way it would have cost less and disrupted fewer communities. That's the proposition put forward by some opponents of HS2. Instinctively, I've always thought that this option was nonsense, and indeed it was considered during the route option selection phase, but was dismissed due to the many problems that will hopefully become apparent shortly. Although experts with much more experience than myself ultimately decided what would be the best route for HS2 based on evidence and thorough route optioneering, I thought I'd explore the M40 option once again. Before we delve into the alternative route though, I feel it's important to first return to the basics with regards to the specification of HS2, because the speed and specification are areas which people feel could have been reduced to save money. The assertion being that HS2 was gold-plated, and the speed was dictated by politicians who are obsessed with speed or outdoing other countries, which is quite frankly absurd. The specification for HS2 was not set on a whim by politicians behind closed doors, but was a measured and evidence-based decision based on the advice and experience from experts from around the world, with findings compiled by people like Professor Andrew McNaughton, who had been the chief engineer at Network Rail for almost 10 years, before becoming the chief engineer at HS2 in 2009, and later the technical director. The advice from other countries which had well-established high-speed networks was not to put a constraint on the potential of any new railway. This meant not limiting the speed to some arbitrary number or one dictated by networks that had gone before. Although 300 km/h routes are commonplace, this speed is largely based on technology that is 40 years old. At the time of HS2's development in 2009, Alstom were already offering a high-speed train capable of travelling at 360 km/h, and other countries were developing proposals for new high-speed lines with permissible speeds up to 360, although the fastest operational high-speed lines currently operate at around 350. Even so, to claim that selecting a speed of 360 km/h for HS2 was down to vanity is nonsense. The difference between the alignment speed and operational speed is also another area which seems to cause some confusion. While it's true to say that the alignments could potentially accommodate 400 km/h trains, the infrastructure, i.e. bridges, viaducts and tunnels, has been designed for 360 km/h trains. You may ask, why design the alignment to support 400 km/h operation when the trains will only operate at 360? This comes back to the advice from world leaders in developing high-speed lines not to hold back the potential of any new route. It was therefore thought prudent to design the UK's new high-speed railway around emerging trends, new technologies and increasing efficiency of new trains, such as the AGV. People are now claiming that 360 km/h is too fast, with the size of the UK often stated as a reason why such a high speed is unreasonably fast. But other countries which have high-speed lines also have cities which are a similar distance apart to those in the UK. The advice to design the line for the highest practical speed came particularly from France, where high-speed trains leave the dedicated network to travel further via conventional tracks. This will also be the case with HS2, with trains linking onto the West Coast Main Line and heading north to places like Manchester, Liverpool and Glasgow. The use of so-called class-compatible services is one of the main driving factors in the requirement to achieve a high top speed, as the journey time savings on HS2 translates to savings much further north beyond the dedicated high-speed tracks. This doesn't change the fact that the primary reason for building HS2 was to release capacity from the busiest mixed-use railway in Europe, and even the heavily curtailed route will deliver on this to some extent, particularly for towns and cities south of Rugby. While capacity was the primary justification, it makes sense to build a line that maximises the benefits as much as possible, so building the line for modern high-speed trains simply makes sense, both from an operational and benefits cost perspective. Despite having presented the facts and arguments for HS2 specification, there will always be those who claim that a slower alignment would have been cheaper, The assertion seems to be that a slower alignment could swerve around woodlands, houses or other obstacles, and following an existing corridor would mean that local stakeholders would be less inclined to oppose such a line. Honestly though, I think this sort of assertion is quite naive, but instead of merely opining on the subject, I thought I would test the assumption. To do this, I have assumed that an alternative railway would have a permissible speed of 300 km per hour, and would follow the M40 as closely as possible. I should note that no evidence has been presented to suggest building a 300 km per hour railway would be noticeably less expensive than a 360 km per hour railway. After all, land and properties would still have to be purchased, and infrastructure built, that wouldn't differ in any meaningful way to that constructed for HS2. Further to this, constructing a curvier and less direct route would also result in the route being longer, requiring more infrastructure and adding to the cost, as demonstrated using this rather crude but effective demonstration. Having said all that, I have genuinely tried to make this option work, while trying to minimise loss of property, woodland or green space, which means trying to maintain a 300 km per hour speed, for which I've assumed a curve radius of around 5,600 metres. The absolute minimum curve radius to comfortably achieve this speed is typically 4,500 metres. On first inspection, it looks like I've managed to achieve the goal, and I've proven that a high-speed railway could follow the M40. But let's zoom in, and it quickly becomes apparent that the route doesn't just sail past properties or woodlands. In fact, just to get beyond High Wycombe requires more tunnelling than HS2 at around the same distance from London. I first attempted to develop a route heading southwest from West Ruislip, requiring only around 12 to 13 kilometres of tunnelling, but I quickly discovered that this would result in a significant impact on woodland, and would require a significant number of properties to be demolished. I therefore opted for a more direct westerly route to High Wycombe, which I estimate would require up to 20 kilometres of tunnelling, without adversely impacting properties or woodland. Despite the route following the M40 as closely as possible, it's almost certain that significant property or woodland loss would be deemed unacceptable by local stakeholders. I believe therefore that a significant amount of tunnelling would be required to get beyond the Chiltern A and OB, no matter which alignment was chosen. Heading northwest, no sooner has the M40 alignment passed High Wycombe, it enters yet another long tunnel. This is required to tunnel under Stokenchurch Gap, a well-known cutting which cuts through an area of special scientific interest. There's no practical option to avoid this other than tunnelling, without having an unacceptable impact on the Aston Rowant Nature Reserve. It's highly unlikely in this day and age that local stakeholders or environmental groups would allow a cutting on the scale of the M40 to be constructed here. Despite my best efforts, just to reach 30 km beyond the M25 would require over 20 km of tunnels, which is unavoidable with such a rigid brief of must follow the M40. The option I've selected follows the M40 as closely as physically possible to Leamington Spa, where the route heads north to intersect with the HS2 alignment to the west of Burton Green. I very much doubt there would be another practical route which would serve Birmingham Airport, the NEC, head to Birmingham city centre, and would also be able to link with the West Coast Main Line north of Lichfield. Without going into the granular detail of the alignment between Stokenchurch and Leamington Spa, I will say that using Google Earth, I have identified several areas that would require the construction of substantial viaducts. It's likely that if I had access to more detailed geographical and topological information, that many more viaduct and cutting locations would have been identified. Although I'm sure if given enough time and access to more detailed maps, it may be possible to refine the route. But the simple fact is, following the M40 alignment as closely as possible just takes the line close to built up areas such as Bicester and Banbury. It also significantly increases the instances where the railway must interact with the M40 and other key roads, requiring more infrastructure and causing more disruption. Given that this is one of the main motorway routes between the north and London, you could imagine the level of disruption this would cause. That's before getting to the myriad of other key roads which must be crossed at critical locations very close to busy M40 interchanges. While I very much doubt I will have convinced the more staunch M40 alignment proponents, I hope I have at least demonstrated sincerely that such an option would provide a significant number of engineering challenges, which calls into question the claim that such a route would have been cheaper, or have been met with any less opposition. I hope you found this video informative. If you have, then please don't forget to give the video a like, or even a so-called hype, as it helps my content to get noticed.